and then anybody else comes, they can catch up with us later as we're flying by. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Heavenly Father, we're thankful again for the opportunity you give us to open your word and to understand what you have written. Pray tonight you will bless your word as it goes out. Anoint my lips to say those things that you'd have me to say. Anoint our hearts to receive. And we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, we're going to start Genesis tonight. We're going to dive in with both feet. And this will probably be a lengthy study. Take up most of the year, I would assume. But we may cut it short too, because some of the Bible stories, rather than to go verse by verse, it'll just be this is, and you all know the story. So, and we'll just try to pick out those things that maybe we need to have a little more light shed on, some understanding. We'll try to pick those things up. And that's going to be the case tonight, sort of. I wanted to go pretty much in detail tonight on the creation, because creation is one of those things, it's where everything started, and yet it's one of those things that most people really don't spend a lot of time on, and really understanding what the scriptures are saying about creation. If God put it there, it's important for us to understand what he put there. Now there's other things he didn't, and that's not for us to worry too much about. So we want to get started, and before we actually get into the book, we need to look a little bit about what Genesis is, who wrote it, and so on. Genesis is basically, it's the first book of the Pentateuch. Now the Pentateuch are the first 5 books of the Bible. It's what the Jewish Torah is based on. It's what the Jews use. Those first 5 books is where they get almost all of their law and how to live and how to be good Jews. Comes out of those first 4 books. And then of course they add to that the prophets and the chronicles of the kings, the history of Israel is added to that, and the Psalms, and so on. So when we talk about Genesis, we're really talking about the very beginning of everything, and it's recognized by the Jews as special, the book of Genesis. Now, who wrote the book of Genesis? That's always been a question it's still being debated, because there wasn't anybody there when God created to write it. Who wrote it? Well, I think almost everyone agrees that the authorship is given to Moses. And it would stand to reason. He was 40 days on Mount Sinai. He received the law, he received all of that on Mount Sinai, but and people have made the statement, well, how could he have gotten the whole book of of Genesis, in 40 days on the mountain? They didn't have typewriters or computers, and you had to kind of chisel it all out. Well, you have to remember that he spent 40 years going into the tent of the congregation and talking with God. And what were they talking about? For 40 years. What better place to get the book of Genesis than while they were wandering around in the desert for 40 years, God's having him write a book. And I know what it's like to write a book. I've been writing how long now on this last book? And still having a problem getting it finished. It just takes a long time. And so I'm not saying that's the case, but I'm throwing that out as a supposition. I think for my part of it, I really believe that that's kind of what happened, is that while that wandering in the desert and seemingly going nowhere, God was giving him the whole history of mankind up to that point. And so when I look at the book of Genesis, I fully feel that this is written by Moses. Now there are some problems in it, and I'm not going to get into them, but for instance, who wrote the book of Genesis and Exodus when Moses died? Who wrote that? We don't know. many of the countries that are named in there were countries that did not get that name until they were in the Promised Land. Okay? So why were those names in there? Well, I answer that, pretty simply, that if, and we see that today, we have translations of the Bible, and things change. Now, the basic content is the same, but if it's talking about, the Indo-Persian Empire, it doesn't call it Indo-Persian, it calls it Persian, because we wouldn't know what Indo-Persian was. We know what Persian is. So, if they're because they didn't take the original notes of Moses and carry them all around until the 1700s when they did the King James Bible. Obviously they were recopied and recopied. And so over time, names were changed as they changed throughout history. Somebody stepped in and wrote the ending of Moses' life. Does that mean the book is any more less inspired? Absolutely not. If God inspired Moses to write it, he probably, or did in fact, inspire whoever added to it the things that needed to be added. So it doesn't affect me one way or the other on the book of Genesis. I don't think it was written by a group of people because it's too well put together. It uses the same language and the same basic structure. So I think one man wrote it and it was changed or added to over time as it needed to be. So that's my take on the authorship of Genesis. Some may disagree with that, but so be it. Now, when was it written? As I've said, I fully feel that it was written during the 40 years of wandering in the desert. There is no history prior to that of any written history of creation or of the things that happened in Genesis. Now, there may have been some oral law, some oral lore that was passed down. There may have been some documents and some things out there about various things, such as the flood and all of these things. But my question immediately is, who could have written about the flood except Noah? There wasn't. There was nobody left after the flood. So these are things that lead me to believe that this was all given to Moses by God to be written the way he wanted it to be written. And so I take that and move on. All right, so what is the time frames that we're looking at? And the time frame of Genesis starts with God creating the heavens and the earth, and it's going to end with the death of Joseph in Egypt. This covers quite a length of time from the very beginning of time until the death of Joseph. And we're covering this really in a book. It's a long book, but it's really not that long when you look at the thousands of years that it's going to cover. Because these early men lived 900 years. So you look at Adam, he lived almost 1,000 years. You go down the line and you start figuring it out. There's a lot of years covered in this book. All right, so any questions on that? Anything you've heard you want to clarify or whatever? All right, let's move on into the book itself. And we're going to start off with Genesis 1 to 2. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Now, this 3 words, in the beginning, this is something that kept me awake at night for about 6 weeks, meditating on what that means. You may say, well, that's kind of dumb. In the beginning means the beginning, right? With me, it was the beginning of what? I've heard preachers say in the beginning of eternity. I've heard others say it's in the beginning of knowledge or something else. So I broke it down, and what I finally came up with after meditation, study, and some research The beginning means specifically the beginning of time. Beginning of time. So in the beginning of time, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, you hear all kinds of things. Well, God created the angels first, and then, he created earth, and then he created heavens. And then you hear other statements, well, God, he started things off and it kind of self-generated. And then, of course, you get all the way to evolution, where somewhere out in the great cosmic, somewhere a piece of dust started spinning, and from this little piece of dust we have the whole solar system and the universe and the earth and all of this. That took billions and billions and billions, billions, multi-billions, trillions and billions of years. Well, when you go to the Word, we get an answer for all of that. If we just said God created the heavens and the earth, it would be open to any kind of interpretation. But it says, at the beginning of time. Why is that significant? We think about time in terms of the clock, the days, the months, the years. That's time. No, that's not really time. What that is a measurement of time. Time is linear. It's anything that starts here and moves along. That's considered time. Okay? Now, if you don't have time, you don't have anything moving along. Correct? If you don't have time, you cannot have evolution. If you don't have time, you can't have angels being created. Because the main attribute of time, or linear, is cause and effect. Did you all hear that?
Yes.
You didn't hear it. The split second I heard it, it took a little bit of time for it to get to. So many nanoseconds. All right? Now, if I hit that hard enough and you're over in Puyallup, it's going to take a little bit of time for that to get there. That's cause and effect. If you don't have time, you can't have cause and effect. If you don't have cause and effect, you cannot have the creation of angels. You cannot have the creation of heaven. You can't have anything. If God created the angels, which the Bible says, man is created just a little lower than the angels. So God created the angels. He could not have done that until time started. And I could bring a whole lot more stuff. But let's just put it this way. At the second that time came into being, the God of eternity. Now, when we talk about eternity, we're talking about a place without time, without cause and effect, and it is not linear. That's why God said to Moses, I am that I am. The Jews understood that to mean he is the existing one. He's always existed. He always will exist. He exists. There's no past. There's no future with God. He just is. That means there's no time. There's no linear. There's no progression. God cannot lie, because what he says today, he said yesterday, and he says tomorrow. It's all current with God. So he can't lie. There's no future. So how can you turn and lie? Because, you see. And that's God. So this God of eternity, one day, for whatever reason, decided to create. Now, how did God do it? Now, we heard the word, he spoke it, right? And we've all been taught that he spoke the word. How can a God of eternity speak? There is no time. There is no cause and effect. How can he speak? Speaking requires time. Oh. So I'm really throwing an enigma out there. I'm making you do a little thinking, aren't I? Well, let me give you my interpretation, and you can say I'm nuts if you want to, whatever. John 1:1. In the beginning. Sound familiar? So what John is doing, now remember, the book of John was written after he wrote the book of Revelation. It was the last book that John wrote, the book of John. So he'd already had his trip to heaven and his visions and his conversations with God and all of it. He's already had all of that. Now he says, hey, I'm going to tell you something. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. John says, in the beginning was the Word. And the Word was God, and the Word, what? Was with God, and the Word was God. This gives us a view of what happened at the very instant of time. And I'm going to draw you a word picture, and I hope I can convey what I see. I see things different than a lot of people sometimes, and it's hard for me to convey them. I'm looking and I see God of eternity, and He's a spirit. There is no function, no physical body. He's a spirit. He's a spirit, and we have to worship Him in spirit and in truth. But this spirit wanted to create, so how did He do that? Well, He had to first of all take on some kind of a form that could speak. And that form had to be outside of eternity. Because if He took the form on while He was in, we call them dimensions in science, it's dimensions. If He stayed in the dimension of eternity and took, He would start time and eternity would no longer be. So outside of eternity, and in my mind I just kind of picture Him stepping outside of eternity, taking on the form, and in that form, creating. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Now, I think that's important for us to understand because, however your view of God is, people get so wrapped around, well, the Father created. Well, did He? The Bible says it was the Word who created. And then it goes on to say, and the Word became flesh and walked among us. So who created? And we sometimes make the mistake of saying, well, Jesus created. No, it was the Word. Jesus didn't happen until He was born. There was no Jesus in the Old Testament. There was the Word. And the Word took on the form of theophanies. It was the theophany, or the Word, that came to Abraham and talked with him. It was the Word that destroyed Sodom, sent the angels to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. You see, when He talked to these Old Testament people, and we're going to talk about Adam and Eve here in a minute, He took on the form, the Word. It was not the Spirit, and I don't want you to get confused here. I'm just saying that it was not the Spirit of eternity. It was the Word of the dimension of time. Same God, but He's operating in a different arena. Does that make sense to you? Are you seeing where I'm coming from? It was that God, that physical portion of God that you could see, that created. Yes?
But you just said that you can see. No one sees Him, right?
As He is in eternity.
Oh,
You see? That's the key. We cannot see Him as He is in eternity. That's why the Bible says nobody's ever seen God and lived.
Right.
You can't.
Right.
He's a spirit. If you see Him, you have to be a spirit.
yeah.
You see?
Yeah.
But we can see, now Gideon turned around, and after the angel of the Lord had come, and we went through Judges. You remember they gave the offering, and he disappeared. And what did he say? I have seen God. And the God was brain dead.
Theophany?
No, it wasn't Theos. Jehovah. He said, I have seen Jehovah and lived. Well, how could you see Jehovah if Jehovah was the Spirit? But Jehovah denotes the physical or visual character of God. He was personal to Israel as Jehovah. As Theo, the Spirit, that was different. That was different. Okay. So I want you to, I want to put that out there, because as we go through, especially tonight, you need to be able to draw that line and understand, because otherwise you get confused just like this.
Yeah.
How could God come down to the Garden of Eden and walk around? He's a spirit. How could he do that? He's already there. He's everywhere. But as the visual word, he could come down to the garden, he could take on any form he wanted, walk around. All right, so I hope that helps you there as we go through this. All right, so what happened? It says in here that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Notice verse 2. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the water. Now, if we take these first two verses together and connect them and say this was a running account, he created, and what he created was formless and void, then we violate one of the major laws of God, and that is he always does things perfectly. He has never created anything that was not perfect. We're going to go through the 6 days of creation. He didn't create anything that he didn't stand back and say it's good.
Right.
So why would he create a world that was formless and void? What would be the purpose? Well, this used to be, this idea used to be shunned at, but now if you look at the majority of the theologians and the various commentaries and whatever, I've got several that I use, they all seem to agree that there is a break between verse 1 and verse 2. What happened between verse 1 and verse 2? And one of the things they base that on is this word was. The word was also means, and in fact actually means, it's the word haya. It actually means to become, come to pass, exist, or happen, or fall out. Okay, so when we look at what's written here, it's telling us that for some reason the earth became formless and void between verse 1 and verse 2. Why? I don't know. The theory is that God created a perfect earth and had everything in place. Now, whether it looked like our earth, I can't tell you that. I don't know. But this is the theory, is that he created this earth. And there are multiple scriptures that talk about Lucifer as being the god of this world. Lucifer as being the ruler of this world. And we take that to mean, the sinful world, the world that we live in. But actually, many of those scriptures mean physically the world as the ruler. Ezekiel talks about how Lucifer walked among all of the precious jewels and stones of fire, which denote, diamonds and all of it, that was on the earth as its ruler. So let's make a supposition here, and again, please, this is theory and supposition, so don't go out there and say, Dr. Steve, this is what happened. But here's something for you to consider. What if God made this earth, he made it perfect, he gave it to Lucifer. He said, Lucifer, this is yours. You rule this. Right? And so Lucifer is ruling the world. Now, what if God also made a whole different atmosphere over here, a whole different world, maybe another whole universe out here. And he gave it to some other archangel and said, you rule this one. And you rule that one. Is that without reason? No, I don't think it is. You know, God's great, and we don't know even that much about God. But let's suppose the earth was Lucifer's, whether he gave it to anybody else or not. We know that Lucifer was the chief guy. He was the highest of everybody. Maybe that was the reward of being, you know. And one day, Lucifer looked around, and he saw the word, visual of God, and he said, you know, I can be like him. In fact, I can be higher than him. Start to make a little sense to you? It does to me. Because he's looking around and he's seeing everything that's given to him. He's the ruler. Where's God? He's watching. And that's no different than today, only he's not the physical ruler of the world, but he rules mankind, and God stands back and watches. And so he gets pride in his heart, and he says, I can be like, you know, higher than, I can be like God. He doesn't mean he can be like Spirit God, like Theos, but he can be like the Word. He can get up to that level. In fact, he can set his throne higher than the Word. He could see the Word. He could talk to the Word. And that's what happened. And of course we know what happened. He was cast, he wasn't, and by the way, he was not cast out of heaven because he's still there. He's constantly going up before using the saints, and where do you do that? You do that in heaven. So he's still there. But it means he was cast out of his place of authority. The earth was taken away from him, and a third of the angels fell, and whatever creatures were on the earth was wiped out. Now we look at that and okay, so where were these creatures? Well, we've been to the La Brea tar pits, and we've watched the dinosaurs. You know, I mean, you can look down in there and there's the bones, and they're almost still bubbling up in these tar pits. Where are these animals? And science will tell you there was some catastrophe that killed all of these animals. There was a comet that slammed into the earth, or there was a meteor that destroyed, or there was something else. They don't know for sure. Maybe it was all volcanoes, but they only know that all the animals were wiped out. And they used to say man came along. Now they have a problem because they're finding physical evidence of men at the same time. Now, about this yesterday. My feeling, my belief is, yeah, we had a pre-Adamic earth, and it may have went for millions of years. I don't know. I have no way of knowing that. But it would explain why all the animals were gone, and whatever creatures were there that Lucifer ruled also disappeared. Cavemen. We call them cavemen. Maybe that's them. And I say that because the problem with evolution has and always will be that they cannot find missing links. You know, they talk about, well, caveman evolved, what are the missing links? If it took millions of years, there should be millions of years worth of skeletons that, you know, show the progression. I mean, you should be able to go out there and start digging up and say, oh look, here's one from the first million, oh this is from the second million, and see how they progress. The same with the evolution of animals. You should be able to go out by some river somewhere and see some bone about that long, you know, and all of a sudden you see animals. That doesn't happen. But if all of them were destroyed, boom, gone. God destroyed them. And God said at the flood, and we'll look at that when we get to it, he said, I will never again destroy the earth like that. So how did he destroy it? Well, when we look at it, it looks like He flooded it. Because it said it was formless and void, and the Spirit of God hovered, or brooded, if you will, over the waters. It didn't say over the dry land. It says over the waters. So, and God's statement after the flood was, I will never again destroy the world with water. This was probably the second time he had destroyed the world with water. First time, wiped out the dinosaurs, wiped out, now whether that was volcanic action that, you know, causes, and we'll talk about what was the earth look like in just a minute. So we're looking at this idea of a break between the first and second verses, and it explains, I mean, we can go so far in calling scientists screwballs. You know, we can say it's all a conspiracy. We can, if you're a conspiracy addict, everything's a spirit conspiracy, anything, anyway. But, no, I think the Bible, if anything, supports science, and science supports the Bible. It's the problem is that we don't understand the Bible sometimes. We get our self-conceived ideas, and we stick with those, and so everything else is wrong. For instance, how many people think that Noah took two animals of every kind into the ark? Most people will say, how many animals? He took 2 of each, male and female. No, he didn't. He took 7 clean and 5 unclean.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And yet, until people are shown that, they're determined, oh, he only took 2 of each. And that's just one of the little things. And you start getting into doctrines, and you start getting into things, and people build ideas on what they thought, what they've been taught, or what somebody else mentions, and that sounds okay, I think I'll go with that. But we really need to look at the Word and see how the Word supports science. Or if science comes up to something that's really screwy, such as evolution, which by law never has been a law. Any scientist of note will tell you it is not a law, it is a theory. It's never progressed beyond theory because they cannot disprove their hypotheses, which is what you have to do. That's another story. But anyway, let's move on. Academics, go away. All right, so the earth was, we don't know exactly what it looked like, but there was something happened between the first and second verses. Also, the Spirit of God moved or hovered or brooded over the face of the water. And the idea here in the Hebrew is that this tends to give the picture or the example of a hen brooding over her eggs. In other words, a hen will lay her eggs, and there's nothing to those eggs. They're just eggs. They've been fertilized, but there's nothing there yet. But she will brood over, she will sit on that nest, and she will turn those eggs, and she'll brood over them until the time is right for the eggs to hatch, and now she has her chicks. And that's the picture that the Hebrew paints here of God hovering or brooding, working on the waters, waiting for that time when creation will burst forth. Now that's not saying God took all that time to create. It just says the Spirit was waiting. Now I don't know what he was waiting for. I don't. He could have done it in an instant. He could have wiped out the earth today and created a whole new one tomorrow. I don't know. But when you look at God and some of the statements he's made, I repent that I ever made man. I repent that I made creation. I'm going to wipe them all out, and that's going to be the end of it. Right? Yeah. So maybe God said, I'm wiping them out, and wiped them out, and then said, I'm not building anything else for a while. I got to get over this. I don't know if God's a God of emotions. I can't say. But, hey, I'm just fed up with it. I don't want to pull through this again. I don't know. I like to think that God is more like us than we think he is sometimes, And maybe he has those feelings. He kind of indicates that he does with the way he's treated Israel at times. I'm not divorce you. I'm turning my back on you. I'm not going to worry about it. Go out there and you do what you want to do. I'm done. So anyway, he was brooding over the waters. And here's an interesting question, and that is, how did this information, how was it given to the author by God? How did he know it was the Spirit of God brooding over the waters? You ever see a spirit? Have you ever seen the wind? Anybody ever see the wind? Yeah, that's one thing Solomon asked. Anybody ever see the wind? No, you never see the wind. But what do you see? The results of the wind, right? And so probably what the author saw was the waters being troubled, the waters being stirred up as the Spirit of God was brooding over those waters. I don't know about you, but I think this is one of those times when I wish I could plug into them. Whoever got the vision, I would love to just plug in and see that scene. Vast, complete disruption and darkness and water, and then to see that brooding, that water being, God saying in effect, I destroyed it all, but I'm still here. I'm still here. And if we could, we need to take that, I think, as something in our lives. Sometimes when our lives, we feel like our lives have been destroyed. But God is there, and God is brooding. And He's disturbing the surface. And He's waiting for the time to bring forth again creation. This is a lesson there. Now this seems to be a summary glimpse, this brooding of the water, is a summary glimpse of what's going to happen in the recreation of the earth. It's like a hen. And those eggs that are got yucky yellow white stuff in them, that's runny, that's really good when it's cooked, not so good when it's raw. Still not going to try one of them duck eggs. This isn't going to happen. But one of my favorite foods, eggs. My wife will tell you, I go through eggs. I love eggs, all different kinds of ways. But it's not until that egg cracks open on its own and out comes a chick. It's yellow, and it's got legs, and it's got a little beak, and it looks around and so cute and walks around. And how did that get out of that yucky stuff that's in the egg 6 weeks earlier? Or 5 weeks? I don't know. How long does it take an egg? I don't know. 3 weeks earlier, whatever it is. I'm not a farmer, so. But we got a little preview of what's going to happen because God's brooding. All right, let's move on here. All right. So, we find out He's created something, He's destroyed something, and now we have this formless and void world. Then God said, let there be light. And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness He called night. So the evening and the morning were the first day. All right, here we have actually the first recording of God's voice. Didn't say He used a voice when He created originally. It just says He created. Here we see the voice of God saying, let there be light. So what was this light? There's no indication that this was this is, I think, important. There is no indication that this was the creation of light, but it was more appropriate to the idea that light was allowed to penetrate the darkness of the chaotic earth. If there wasn't light in the first place, how could the original creation of, how could that have existed very long without light? But if he cast darkness on the earth, and it was covered with clouds, covered with water, I mean, you can begin to see the chaotic nature of the earth at this point. Here's light out here. Now, the other thing is we don't know what the light was made out of. What was it? What was the light? We don't know. Now, I don't think it was the sun, because we're going to find out later that he gathers it up into the sun. So, what was this light? We don't know. He didn't tell us, and I'm not about to go ask him yet. One of these days, I'll have a chance. One of my 1,000 years of asking questions, I'm going to get some answers. And my rank as an educator, I deserve more time. But anyway, so he allowed here, the commentaries kind of agree on this, that darkness was on the face of the earth, but not upon the heavens. It doesn't say any place that there was darkness in the heavens, only on the face of the earth. And we know that part of the chaos on the earth was darkness. So God said, let there be light. In other words, the clouds started parting, and light again began to penetrate onto the earth. All right, now, there's some idea, and some scientists actually have put out some research into this, that at this time there were luminous clouds in the heavens that gave off light. Luminous clouds. Now, what would be luminous clouds? You know, well, they see these, and you've probably seen pictures. These beautiful pictures, you know, and it's some nebula that's 8.5 million light years from here, and here is this huge nebula, and they say, well, our sun would be that little point right up there. You know, so you start to see how huge these things are. And they give off light. They're luminous. So the theory here is that they had these luminous clouds that gave off light. Not necessarily the sun, but luminous clouds. I don't know. I'm just passing along what I've read. I've been trying to book a ticket back on a time machine to figure this all out, but it just doesn't happen yet. All right, so the feeling is that these luminous clouds would be used in the fourth day of creation to form the sun. Okay. Now, I know this sounds weird, but just hang with me. I think you'll begin to kind of see how some of these things maybe better explain the days of creation. Because otherwise we have God creating the sun twice. On the first day and on the fourth day. How could he create the same thing twice? So, this kind of answers some of that. Notice this, it said, God looked at the light and he said it was good. That means not good in terms of good and excellent, but that it served his purpose. So every time we see that phrase, and God saw that it was good, it served his, emphasis on his purpose. All right. Then he divided the day and the night was formed by the light being on one side of the earth. people have said, well, he divided the sun and the moon by putting the earth on rotation, and so now we have days, you know, day and night. Well, that's quite possible, except we tend, again, to look at it and say, okay, day and night, this has to be a rotation of the earth day and night. Actually, the word day in the Hebrew that's used here is named, the name day in Hebrew signifies warmth or heat, while the name signifies a rolling up, as night wraps up all things in a shady mantle. And this has all kinds of possibilities when we look at the Hebrew definition of these. But let me give you my impressions, and again, most all this is my impression, so you know, I said before, believe me, don't believe me, it's completely irrelevant. It's not going to gain anybody 1 ounce of salvation, or is it going to, you know, and one of those really important things. But I think it is important to get some kind of what creation was all about, because it's when we get the concept of creation we can be how God communicates, how God works with people, and what God expects of people. Okay? And so when we look at this idea of light and darkness, I think of it as the moon. The moon has absolutely no rotation. It just sits there. Which means one side of the moon is constantly lit, and one side is constantly dark. It doesn't change. It doesn't, you know, slowly rotate, so at some point the back side of the moon is now light. That's why it was so intriguing when our Apollo crews could circle it and actually take pictures of the back side of the moon, and they said, we have pictures of the dark side of the moon. Well, if we look at the earth in this same perspective, here's the earth sitting here. It doesn't necessarily have to be rotating or moving anywhere, just sitting here. Here's light, here's darkness. The two were separated. Light, darkness. How did God do that? He took all the light and put it on this side. No light on this side, light on this side. I mean, it's kind of, okay, that's kind of silly. Well, he just gathered all the luminous clouds and set them over here, and said, over here there's no light. Now you've got light and darkness. How does he figure days? Now this has always been intriguing, because the Bible does say a day is as 1,000 years with the Lord. So was this 1,000 years that this went on? I don't particularly prescribe to that. I don't think we need to. But it was probably not a day as we think of a day in a revolution of the earth. It had its own meaning as far as time was concerned. He called it a day. He called it warmth. Warmth. And the first day of warmth. The second day of warmth. The third day of warmth. Now you see, we start to think about it maybe a little differently. What did he mean by warmth? In the first warmth, the second warmth, the third warmth, the fifth warmth, the sixth warmth. Not so much. I think we need to kind of not focus on rotational of the earth, but think about what he was doing. The brooding. What causes chicks to hatch? Warmth. So he was preparing. What was he preparing for? The Bible tells us that we were known to him before the worlds were created. See, he created all of this for us. For us. He took first and he separated light from darkness, and he was warmth and unwarmth, or darkness, or cold over here, warm over here. And then then the next day he's going to create some other things, and he's going to make a place for us Have you thought about that in those terms? We're chicks, just waiting to be hatched, and he's slowly brooding over us as we develop, or as this, not we, but as everything develops around us, so that when we break forth, we have a place that's prepared, that's perfect for us. And earth is absolutely perfect, even in its worst conditions sometimes. It's still perfect for us. All right, let's move ahead. And again, he looked at it and it said it fit its purpose. Now, some people say this was the concept of good and evil. I don't think it had anything to do with the concept of good and evil. It was, you know, we like to spiritualize, or at least some people like to spiritualize a lot of things. But really all this is saying, in my view, is that God was preparing. If you will, he was building a nest. He was getting ready for his eggs to hatch. He was getting ready for the final burst of creation when he makes man. All right, let's move on. Okay. Verse 6. Then God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters." Thus God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. And God called the firmament heaven. So the evening and the morning were the second day. So what was this all about? We have waters, and we have waters, and in between we have heaven. Now some people say, this is heaven. You know, this is where the angels all live. That's what he's talking about. No, he's talking about the firmament. What is the firmament? Firmament is our atmosphere. So God, first of all, divided the waters and put atmosphere in there. What were the waters he divided? Wait a minute. You know, I mean, we're sitting here saying, what in the world are you talking about? How can you know? Well, we understand the lower waters, the waters under, I think, because the earth was covered with water. And the Spirit was moving on the water. But what were the upper waters? Well, this is something, you know, that's been theorized by theologians and, you know, different ones. And science also has come to the conclusion that at some point, it's very probable that the earth had a band of water that encased it. So we had water, we had atmosphere, and we have the earth. Now that, you know, that sounds crazy, but anybody look at Uranus lately? It's a blue planet. It's covered with, well, it's not exactly water, but it's a very similar, it's covered with that. Look at Venus, it's covered with another gas. I mean, you look at these planets and they all have something, except for Jupiter and Mars and I forget, Pluto if you want to look at him. But, you know, they all have, many of them anyway, have this band of something around them. We can't actually see the ground. It's covered with something. Well, the earth was covered with water. And so God separated that, or made an atmosphere in between, which would mean that the light getting to the earth was filtered through water. Didn't mean there wouldn't be any light, it would just be filtered through water. And so God made the firmaments, and he separated these waters. It's interesting that at any one instant, the Earth's atmosphere contains 37.5 million billion gallons of water vapor. That's enough to cover the entire surface of the planet with 1 inch, of rain if condensed. So our atmosphere already has a lot of water in it. Now we're going to find something out at the end of this chapter, so, but I will say this, in those days it didn't rain. So where did the water come from? Well, we'll get into that. In addition, it says, the fountains of the deep opened, and water that was below the surface of the earth added to the flooding. Now we're talking here about Noah's flood. The Bible says that it rained. It hadn't rained prior to that time. Suddenly it rained. And it says the waters, fountains of the deep opened up. Now we'll get into the flood later, so I don't want to go into too much, but if we think about this band of water that's no longer there, where did it go? If God allowed it to inundate the earth, along with the fountains of water that were in the earth, under the crust of the earth, and again, science says they think there's a crust of water under the earth. So, that's where we get the flooding that covered the mountains. Because even if all of our atmosphere dumped, it would only be 1 inch. So maybe we're starting to see a little bit about God's plan here, and why he created things the way he did. He knew he was going to have to destroy it again with water. And so he already has the preparations. All right. Verse 9. Then God said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear, and it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters he called seas, and God saw that it was good. All right, at the start of the third day, there is no earth. Well, there's an earth, but I mean there is no dry ground. It's all water. We haven't heard a thing about dry ground. All water. So what does God do? He gathers all of this water in one place. And he called it seas. Now we say, well, how many seas? I mean, there's the Pacific Ocean, there's the Atlantic Ocean, and there's the North Sea, and there's the, But it's all connected. It's all connected somewhere with water. Now science tells us, again, that the continents all came together at some point, So, to me, it's not without some basis of science that God simply took all the land and squished it all together here, and when he did it, it hollowed out the depths of the sea, pushing them together raised the land, and now you have seas. Some of the deepest seas on the earth are so deep down that I don't know that we may have now gone down to most of them, but some of them are miles deep, much deeper than our highest mountains. And so God pushed them out, and now we have our seas. So now we have seas and we have dry land. Now I'm not going to go into any great argument with anybody on it, but I would say, how did God do that? And it may have been as a result of volcanic eruptions. It could have been, or he just may have took his hand down and said, I'm going to fix this. That's that. I'm not going to get into some big discussion with somebody on it. It merely means that in whatever God's dispensation of day was, morning and night, and it wouldn't be the rotation of the earth because we don't have day and night yet, by the way. That doesn't happen until later. So what was his day and night? It was warmth and cold. And so he formed this out, and the waters ran in, and now we have this idea of seas and dry land. And I might add here, there are a lot of legends, there's a lot of stuff out there, and it's surprising how so much of that is actually based on some kind of fact. Everybody's has been looking for the lost city of Atlantis. You hear the lost city of Atlantis, or all these other things. And every once in a while, you'll see where some deep diver has found columns where there shouldn't be, or there's other things out there. Could these be the remnant of the first Earth? And these things get carried over. You say, how does that happen? Well, I can't answer that one exactly. Maybe somebody finds some inscription someplace and, or knows what it means, and I don't know. But there are a lot of these legends that are actually based on some fact one of them is Noah's flood. I mean, every major group of people has a legend about a flood. Their legend may not be anywhere close to what happened, but it's about a catastrophe, a big flood. They all start at the same place, so there's an origin, a place that all this comes. So there's a possibility that all of these things kind of add together and come up with some ideas of what the first earth looked like. Volcanic eruptions, we do know, played a big part in raising the land. That's been proven scientifically, so when that happened, don't know. Still going on in Hawaii, for instance. You see that volcano and it's adding all the time. It's just adding more. The land's starting to go out into the water because the lava is going out, solidifying. So the land is growing there. Other places it's shrinking. All right, verse 11. Then God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb that yields seed, and the fruit tree that yields fruit according to its kind, whose seed is in itself on the earth. And it was so. And the earth brought forth grass, the herb that yields seed according to its kind, and the tree that yields fruit, whose seed is in itself according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. So the evening and the morning were the third day. So once the dry ground became available, God began planting things. Now I just want to throw this out to you to think about. It doesn't say he created trees with fruit on them, or grains, herbs with the grain already on them. And grains here would be wheat, rye, barley, whatever. It didn't say he did that. He said, let the earth bring forth. So how long did it take for the earth to bring forth seeds and fruit? How long does it take for a fruit tree to bear fruit?
Have to have seeds started.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pointing this out to you because, again, we get this idea. God said, okay, let there be fruit trees, and there was fruit trees with apples all over them. And here, I want barley over here, and put some wheat there, and there they all are. Okay, it's all done. But that isn't what the Bible says here. In the Hebrew backs it up that he said, let the earth bring forth. Okay? And this is a principle with God. And that also backs up my statement, I don't think a day was a 24-hour period. Okay? Now God could have done all of this, but I don't think he did. I think he said to the earth, bring forth. In other words, the seeds were in the earth. And it was probably from the first earth. The seeds, last forever. I mean, it seems like seeds never rot. And so he just said, seeds are there, come forth. And out came the seeds. The bushes, the trees, and they started giving fruit. How long did that take? With God, not very long, obviously, but with us, that might have been 6 years, 5 years, 10 years. If you're talking about a grapevine I think is 7 years to produce grapes. At least I think that's what it was when I was raised down there. I think that's what they said.
Pops up like magic.
Oh yeah, boom, there you are. And we want to make God do that. Pop things up with magic. But think about this. What was the intent of God? God's intent was not to make life and just continually make life. His intent was to make life so that it would propagate its own life. Right? So by saying bring forth, he was saying you bring forth. Earth, you bring forth life. Earth, you're going to be the producer of food. I'm not going to be the producer of food. The only food I know that God ever produced was manna. The rest of it, he said, it's up to you. Earth, you got to produce. Start to see kind of the plan of God, the way he thinks. And we can carry that over to us. He doesn't save everybody and then just go along and keep creating saved people. We have to make saved people. We don't save them, obviously, but he has already saved them. He has already provided the life. He has already done everything he needs to do. It's now up to us to bring forth fruit. That's why he uses the example of bearing fruit. The apostle used the examples of bearing fruit. It's our job to bear fruit. It's not God's job to bear fruit. All right? It's not his job to plant seeds, not his job to water them. It's ours. All right. So we see here the three major, oops, what did I do here? Clean my screen later. That's what it means. Okay, these are the three great dimensions of the vegetable kingdom. You have the herbs of the green, you have the grass, you have trees. Okay, notice this. Each type of plant brought forth its own type of fruit. God said that it served his purpose. There was a detailed order in creation, and everything had its place and its boundaries. You didn't see wheat and barley getting together and producing wheat barley, or barley wheat, or something else. Now man does it. We combine things, you know. But God didn't in the beginning. An orange tree always brought forth oranges, grapefruit tree, grapefruit, and you never expected to walk out and see a peach. All right, let's move ahead. Verse 14. Then God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and seasons and for days and years. And let them be for lights in the firmament of the heavens to give light on the earth." And it was so. And God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. God set them in the firmament of the heavens to give light on the earth, and so to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. So the evening and the morning were the fourth day. So here on the fourth day, we finally get the rotation of the earth. Now we have 24-hour days. Why did he do all of this? Very simply, it says here, he put these things up in the sky to give light on the earth, the stars, the sun, the moon, light on the earth. And he did it for the setting of signs in the seasons, for the days and the years. So man could begin to tell time. You know, we think sometimes God isn't concerned about time, but it says specifically here that he put them up there so we could not only see the seasons, not only do we have, you know, spring, summer, autumn and fall, fall and winter. I don't want to forget good old winter, that's where we are now. We not only have the seasons, but also so we have the days, the months, the years, so we can tell time. And that's interesting, I think, that he thinks about our ability to tell time. Now it says, notice also, it doesn't say that he spoke the sun and the moon into existence. It doesn't say he created them. It said he made them. Made in Hebrew means he took something that was and formed it into something. So we have, I'm going back to those luminous clouds. If he took all of those luminous clouds and put them together, crunched them up, there's your sun. He took over here the moon, which is nothing more than dirt of some kind, you know, soil, put it over here and started it all in motion. And then he created the stars, and he put everything in motion. Our galaxies. You know, we just think about the stars. But think about some of those stars we're looking at are galaxy with millions of stars in them. And some of those have millions of stars and millions of stars. And I kind of get a kick every time they send out a new telescope, because it's going to take us, we're going to be able to see the edge of everything out there. We're going to be able to see the edge of the universe. We can see what's beyond it. And every time they get out there, all they see is more stars, more galaxies, more. They'll never get to the end of it because there is no end. And I don't know if it's out there all the time, or God just says, okay, time for some more, let's have some more. But we'll never see beyond what God has created us for. It's not going to happen, because it's not part of His creation. And it's none of our business, whatever's out there. I don't know, maybe there's dragons, and I don't know, who knows what's out there. Someday. All right, so He set them all in the firmament, in the skies, to set up for us. And He divided the heavens. He divided the light from the day. And notice, the day will rule over the night. Darkness cannot overcome light, but light can overcome darkness. You have to turn the light off in order for darkness to rule light. Just a principle of God. And so we have the moon, which gives a subdued light at night. It's our night light, so we can move around and see at night. But it's not so bright that it keeps us awake, or and everything is now in its cycle. All right. Anything else here? All right. Notice there's one thing also, and this is interesting, that the cycle of plants depends on the cycle of light and darkness. Why do our plants go to sleep in the wintertime? Throw all their leaves off, and look like an old bare stick sitting out there. Because the light disappears, and it doesn't get enough light for photosynthesis, and it clogs up, and the leaves fall off, and then you got a dead plant, and you want to go out and dig it up. But if you wait till spring, when the light starts again, guess what? You look, and there's little buds, and pretty soon there's flowers and leaves, and you got a beautiful plant. And if you know how to prune right, you can prune that, and it'll come out bigger than it was the year before. That's the cycle of light and dark. All right, verse 20. Then God said, let the waters abound with an abundance of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the face of the firmament of the heavens. So God created great sea creatures, and every living thing that moves, with which the waters abounded, according to their kind, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the sea, and let birds multiply on the earth. So the evening and the morning were the fifth day. All right. First creatures that God creates are the fish. And the fish are at the bottom of our food chain, usually. Sea creatures, we usually think of them as kind of being at the bottom of the food chain. You go down under the sea, and you've got clams, and you've got oysters, and you've got crabs, and you've got lobsters, and you have all kinds of fish. And you look at all of that, and it just seems to be everywhere. But God created them specifically to be everywhere. After He created, He gave them a command. You ever think of that? I mean, He commanded those fish. And God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply. That's a command. So the fish, being fish, they can't say to God, I don't feel like it today. I don't think I want to do that. Because they are created specifically to fill the seas. They don't have a matter of choice. It's going to happen. And they show up in some of the craziest places sometimes. Last year, I think I mentioned my fish ponds, all of a sudden I had native fish of some kind in my fish ponds that are concrete and have goldfish and koi, and all of a sudden I have these strange fish in there. Tiny ones, so they were eggs that hatched in my pond for some reason. I lost them all when the algae hit last year and wiped them all out, but I had about 30 fish in there. And they were getting pretty good size, whatever they were. I don't know, I never was able to identify them. But they abound, and they seem to just abound. No matter what happens, they usually manage to overcome whatever adversaries they have. And they just abound more and more. And notice this, it says the firmament or atmosphere was given the ability to support winged animals in flight. Have you ever thought about the air? You don't see the air. You don't even know air is there. I mean, I can move I don't really feel anything here. Now, down south, when it really gets saturated, and you get up about 90% humidity, you move your hand, you can feel something. But think about this. That bird can be sitting right here next to me. He puts his wings out and starts flapping, and the next thing you know, he's sailing. He's flying. Why? Because the air can support his weight when he moves it and compresses it under his wings. God made it that way for the express purpose of the birds. That's what it says. He made the firmament to support the birds so they could fill the firmament with their wings. And it notices what it says about the earth. It says, and let the birds multiply on the earth. So the first inhabitants of the earth were birds. We think we're so good, no, it wasn't us. And by the way, we did not evolve from birds.
Right.
There was no little creature that crawled out of the water and eventually mutated into something that turned into a bird and then later into a man, or branched off and half became a bird and half became an animal of some other kind. Didn't happen. Birds were the first things created on the earth. And I'll stick with that one. All right. So the propagation of all the species of the fish and the birds were set in motion. That's how we have babies. That was all started. But notice also it says, speaking of the birds, that each was to bring forth after its kind. There is no cross-pollination to the species that God created. We didn't have doves mating with eagles, or sparrows, mating with hummingbirds, or whatever. We didn't have some hybrid birds that suddenly appeared. Evolution will tell you that, but no, that isn't what happened, because each one after its kind. That means you got boundaries. And if you'll notice, animals don't even attempt that. You ever see a cat and a dog try to get together? They don't. They reject it because they know it's in their species. Now, you may have different types of dogs or different types of cats or birds. Within a sparrow, you may have a white-headed sparrow and a black-headed sparrow or something. I don't know. But I have sparrows at my house, and I don't see any that are crossed anywhere. Some of them all have black heads, and some of them have something else, but I don't see half and half, or a big white spot over its eye or anything like that. They all look the same. I have a hard time telling them the difference. I say, is that Jimmy or is that Bob? I can't tell that. No, I'm kidding. I feed them, but. All right, also notice this. God pronounced his first blessing. His first blessing was on the birds and on the fish. about that? We think we're special. God made his first blessing on them before we were ever around. All right, verse 24. Then God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures according to its kind, cattle, creeping things, and beasts of the earth, each according to its kind, and it was so. And God made the beast of the earth according to its kind, cattle according to its kind, and everything that creeps on the earth according to its kind, and God saw that it was good. All right, on the sixth day, God started out the sixth day by commanding the earth to bring forth living creatures. Now, unlike the plants, God commanded the earth and the plants to bring forth plants, right? And so we have that same bring forth animals. But notice what it goes on to say is that God made the beasts of the field. What that means is he took from the earth and created the animals. And you know, you've heard preachers say how special man was because God took from the earth and created man. I got news for you. He created all the animals on the earth from the earth.
Yeah.
The same way. He made them. He formed them. There's a difference, of course, between man and animals. It's not that God formed man differently than he formed the animals. It's that he breathed the breath of life into them. He didn't breathe the breath of life into the animals. They lived. The fish lived and breathed. The animals, the birds, lived and breathed, but nowhere does it say God ever breathed anything into them. And we were talking about this coming from the dust of the earth, and I haven't been able to do a large study on this one yet. I've got it on my to-do list. But you know, science tells us that oil that we use a lot of is dead animals, right? We've heard that. It's always been, you know, it's the dinosaurs that died, and because they're carbon, you know, they... How many million or billion animals would it take to make all the oil that we've already consumed? And they're still finding huge oil deposits. And it's based on the fact that oil is carbon, basically carbon-based. We're carbon-based. So it must be dead creatures that makes the oil. I go the other way. What if it's the oil, the tar, the carbon base that God used to make the animals? I've heard some theories in science, and they have a lot of data to kind of back it up, is that actually oil is kind of the blood of the earth. It's what moves through the earth and carries, has its certain functions. And when you drain an area, even though you pump seawater into it, we see all kinds of things happening. All kinds of bad things happen, right? Earthquakes, and things don't work right in the earth. And we have all kinds of crazy things going on. I'm not saying it's fact. I'm just pointing that out as some way to think differently about things sometimes, the way God has created things. Okay, now these animals were created solely to be on the earth. God did not create some sea animals to move onto the earth, nor did he create earth animals to move onto the sea. They don't evolve back and forth. They were put in their place. Now there's three types of animals mentioned here. There's large animals that would serve the purpose of man. And that would be such as cattle that feed on plant matter. You know, these are animals we think about, and they don't have to be all plant eaters. We've got dogs and cats, and we've got all kinds of things that serve man. The second were the small animals that serve a limited or no purpose to man. And these would be your insects, your rodents, squirrels, you know, things like that we see, raccoons. Sometimes you wonder why in the world God ever made some of these. But, you know, they're all out there for some reason. And then the third one is the beasts. And these, in the Hebrew, means wild animals. These were the carnivorous animals that prey on other animals. And you maybe heard people say, well, prior to the Garden of Eden, all the animals, nobody, they were all plant eaters. Well, there's no evidence of that. It's just that they would all lay down together. They all got along together. But what happens if a sheep is sick and dying? Who takes care of that sheep or that other animal out there? Carnivorous animals. They clean them up. They're there for a purpose. It doesn't mean that they went hunting perfectly good animals. I don't know. But it seems to indicate from the Hebrew that we had those three at the very creation of time, or at the beginning of time. So that's kind of interesting theory there. All right. We started late, so I'm still on time. All right, verse 26. Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. Then God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. This is probably one of the most controversial and discussed scriptures in all of the Bible.
That's what I asked.
This seems to indicate, just in the English, it indicates that there's a conversation in which God commands us, in quotation marks, us, to make man in our image and our likeness.
Who is our?
Who's he talking to?
Right.
Himself?
There's two of them?
No, I said himself.
Is he talking to himself?
They said R.
Yeah, so,
Is he a R?
This is an interesting scripture.
Right.
And then it becomes even more interesting when he says, let us create man in our image. And then it goes on to say, and he created man and female.
Right.
What does God look like?
Right. He didn't have
What's
one.
his image?
Right.
What's his likeness? The whole problem with this scripture, I think, is that we're trying to look at it through the eyes of man and not through the eyes of God. Now, admittedly, we can talk about this stuff, and I have it down, some of the stuff here. Some say he was talking to angels. But how can angels make anything? They do not have creative abilities. So they could not have made man.
Maybe they had an image with God.
But you see, we get into trouble with that one because this indicates that they have creative power. Let us make man.
Right.
But angels can't do that. At least we've never seen any indication that they can. And they're created beings themselves, so how can they create anything? Secondly, some assume this is a conversation between the personalities in the Godhead. But how does man fit that idea? Now, I can look at it and I can say from a positional standpoint, God is a father, God is a son, and God is a husband. Therefore, man can be God. He can be father, he can be son, and he can be husband. The only problem is he made man and woman, and all of a sudden we got a problem. They can't be father, and that doesn't work. There's an idea that God was using the plural form of some modern rulers too, but that was not used in the Old Testament times. How many times have you heard rulers or important people speak in the third person? We have a great thing. We have done well ruling this country, speaking in the third person. And
Yeah.
there's some people that do that. You hear them all the time. Well, we think this. Well, they're talking about themselves. But God has never spoke in a plural of himself. In fact, the opposite. He always speaks in the singular of himself. I am God. I did this. I will do that.
Okay.
So what is going on here? All right, the word that's used here for God is Elohim. And it's used throughout chapter 1. Elohim. And we've talked about this word before. But when you use the word Elohim in the Hebrew, we call it English, you know, if you're taking an English class, but if you're taking a Hebrew class, and you're using the word Elohim, Elohim is a plural word. And so every time it's used, it must be accompanied by plural verbs, unless there is something that makes it singular. Now that sounds strange, except that if I say I have sheep, how many sheep do I have? I can have one sheep, or I can have many sheep, because there's no such thing as sheeps. Right? So how do you know how many sheep I have? There has to be a verb or some other adjective in there, something that says, that indicates how many sheep I have. If I have one, or do I have more than one? So what we see here, let us make man, Elohim, and God said, let us make man in our image, because Elohim in this case is plural. It doesn't mean there's a plurality that's speaking. It means that the word is plural. All right? So let's read on to what it says. Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, birds of the air, cattle of the earth. And now notice in 27. And God created man in his own image. That's singular. Okay? So what we're probably looking at here is a grammatical, not an error, but it's just the way it was written, the Hebrew grammar. That answers it, and by the way, that's not my take. If you, there is one of the 5 top linguists in the United States is at Liberty University. He's also considered one of the best theologians there, and this is his statement. He says you cannot use this to prove that there is more, or that God was speaking in a plurality. It merely means that the Hebrew grammar was used here, which demands that a plural be used to support the singular, because there's nothing else to change it. But in the next verse, we see that it's singular, therefore this whole phrase, when taken together, means that Elohim, singular, created. Also, there's something else to just keep in mind, and if you remember our discussions back in some of the other books, the word Elohim is not a name of God. That might surprise you. It is not a name of God. Elohim merely means a spiritual being, or do I have it down here? Or means gods, small g, O-D-S, gods or deities. You can go to Exodus 12:12, and it says, "For I will pass through the land of Egypt on that night, will strike the firstborn of the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against the gods, Elohim of Egypt, I will execute judgment. I am the Lord." It also can mean supernatural beings, 1 Samuel 28:13. "And the king said to her, 'Do not be afraid. What do you see?' And the woman said to Saul, 'I saw a spirit,' Elohim, 'ascending out of the earth.'" And it can also mean the mighty. Psalms 82:1. "God stands in the congregation of the mighty. He judges among the gods," Elohim. Psalms 82:6-7. "I said, 'You are gods,' Elohim, 'and all of you are children of the Most High, but you shall die like men and fall like one of the princes. Okay? And we can go on and on. In the beginning of Job, it says, and God had a session in heaven. You know how it opens up, and God was there, and Lucifer walks in. Elohim walked in. So it is not a name that is specific to God. It merely means deities. Now, how is that important? Well, it may not be important at all, or it could help to explain some of what we're talking about here. My belief is in this one, is that God said, let us. In the beginning was the Word was with God. What was the Word? Physical, visible portion, or not portion, but a theophany that God took on when He wanted to communicate. And He said, now, let us. Let's take the Word. What's the Word look like? But maybe that's what man looks like. Not necessarily man and woman, but man. 2 arms, 2 legs, head, hair. I'm man. I don't know. But some things for you to think about. But here's another one. And I ran across this on the web the other day when I was looking through all of this and putting this together. And I found this website, and the writer presents an entirely different view of this scripture. And when it hit me, I all of a sudden looked back and I said, this makes more sense than anything I've heard. What is a likeness of a ruler? What is the image or a likeness of a ruler?
a reflection?
Well, a reflection, but when we think about Nebuchadnezzar, for example, what do we think about Nebuchadnezzar? When we say the image of Nebuchadnezzar, what are we talking about?
His personal,
Big statue?
yeah.
Big statue, right? In the Old Testament, and they still do it today. A king, especially in those days, they couldn't get all over their kingdom. They couldn't say, "I rule the kingdom," because he would make daily trips around he didn't get in his jet and fly over here to Egypt and say, "I'm here." So how did he let people know who was the ruler? They would put images or statues all around. These images, these statues that said, "I am the ruler." Now, he wasn't there, but the statue stood there as a testament of the ruler. That make sense?
Yeah.
All right. According to John 4:24, God is a spirit, so how can he have an image or likeness? Well, we talked about that. It could be the Word. Not necessarily. The question is, how does man reflect the image and likeness of God? Even if we use the idea of the theophany, how does man reflect that? How does God in that likeness? Let me read you what he wrote. J. Richard Middleton, out of Roberts Wesleyan College, puts it well. The liberating image. He offers that the image of God describes the royal office or calling of human beings as God's representatives and agents in the world. Image of God means that humans have been given power to share in God's rule or administration of the earth's resources and creatures. When one reads Genesis 1:26 to 27, with this in mind, the point becomes fairly obvious. Let us make humankind in our image according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish, birds, cattle, and animals, and creeping things. mankind, created on the sixth day, has been given the authority to rule over the other creatures God has made on the fourth and fifth days. They have that authority because humankind is made in God's image. There is nothing here about a soul, the ability to reason, being conscious of God, or any other physiological or spiritual trait. As John Walton points out, as important as these qualities are for making us humans, they do not define what image of God means in Genesis. Rather, those qualities are tools that serve humans in their image-bearing role. The phrase image of God is not about what makes us humans. It is about humanity's unique role in being God's kingly representatives in creation. Once we understand what image of God means in Genesis, we will be better positioned to see how this idea is worked out elsewhere in the Bible. I don't know about you, how that took you. It hit me right between the eyes. Didn't Jesus say that we are the walking image of God? He didn't put it in those terms, but isn't that really what he said? That we're supposed to be images of him? The Apostle Paul says, we are epistles, open and read of all men. What's an epistle? You know, it's God. We're supposed to be God walking on the earth. Not in the idea that I can save everybody and create anything.
Right.
But we should be the living image of the one who is the ultimate ruler. When people look at us, they ought to be able to say, God rules. I know who rules this place. And notice we were given dominion over the animals. It doesn't say the animals are peers with us, even with us, that we should worry about animals the same as we worry about him. We have dominion over them. We rule over them. Doesn't mean we're supposed to be cruel, you know. I'm just saying that our position is above animals. And yet some people, if you belong to PETA, the animals are higher than humans. They'll do anything, you know, to protect these animals from whatever. God said they're given to us to eat. So if I want to go out and shoot an elk and eat it, that's perfectly all right with God, because that's what he set up in the first place. Whether PETA likes it or not, I don't care. Of course, I don't. Too old to go out and shoot anymore. All right, I'm going to leave that one. I want to leave it. Man is just not just another animal, but he's made to move over the animals. Genesis, again, verse 29, and God said, see, I have given you every herb that yields seed, which is on the face of all the earth, and every tree whose fruit yields seed you shall be for food. Also every beast of the field, to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth, in which there is life, I have given every green herb for food, and that was so. Then God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. So the evening and the morning were the sixth day. Every plant that God originally created was meant to provide food for man and the animals. That's what I want to pull out of that one. So he did not create dandelions, Johnson grass, thistles.
That was the weeds that came on.
They can't eat that stuff. Well, I guess you could eat dandelions. I know they make a pretty good tea, I guess. I don't know. But, you know, he only created those things that were good for food. But it was after the fall that the other things came in. All right.